Good afternoon, everyone. Happy to see you for the second webinar of the year dedicated to the current macroeconomic context. A quick introduction of Merrill Investor Channel if it's the first time with us. I'm the Chief Investment Officer and Head of Asset Management at Jesmond Mizzi Financial Advisor. The company has 20 years of existence. If you wish to know more about us, I invite you to visit our website. Before we start our journey, let me read to you the disclaimer. The content of these presentations has been prepared for general guidance and information purpose only. Any information provided through the presentation does not constitute any financial, investment, or professional advice or recommendations. Let's start. Inflation is a concern not only for investors, but also for consumers. In our previous webinar, we highlighted the fact that major central banks were not active in 2021. But during the same period, some EM central banks, like the Central Bank of Brazil, initiate a hiking cycle to fight inflation. In today's agenda, I will explore with you the current macroeconomic landscape and the monetary policy of the central banks. We will investigate what sovereign bonds has to offer to the investor, followed by a discussions on the Federal Reserve and the ECB and their respective labor market. Finally, I will speak about the recent inflation figures using the CPI. However, we opt for a different approach by using several leading indicators instead of the traditional CPI, which was a lagging indicator. Now, let's start our journey with the first slide. As you can see here, we will explore on this map to review the level of the yield you can earn by simply buying a government bond for one of these European countries present here or the US. Our simple thesis here is that you wish to invest your money for the next 10 years in one of these countries. By the way, knowing that Italy and Germany are in the Eurozone, Sweden is not a part of the Eurozone, but it's a European country. He has his own currency, the Swedish krona, and his independent central bank, Riksbank. Now, it shouldn't be a surprise for you to see Italy at the top, knowing the recent headlines, especially the recent elections in Italy. So what we can see, Italy and UK, they can offer a yield above 4%. Italy has a rating of BBB, when UK has a rating of AA. Now, as we know also, Bank of England interventions has had a massive impact on the recent trajectory of the yield. They try to protect the UK pension fund following the decisions of this new government. Now let's go back on the second part of the section here, and what we can find here, US and Norway. Both of them, they're offering a yield between 3 and 4% with a rating respectively of AA plus for US and AAA for Norway. In the third part of the section, Sweden and Germany offer a yield between 2 and 4% for a rating which is similar with a AAA. At the bottom, Switzerland is offering a yield below 2% for a rating of AAA. You probably think it's not an attractive yield, but you are wrong, because from a currency aspect, Swiss franc was the most resilient currency against the dollar this year. The residents of Switzerland kept their purchasing power compared to the European, not only this year, but also the previous year. Let's go to the next slide here. And this slide is to show the hiking cycle of the different central banks. Let's take a time to discuss the positioning of each central bank located in Europe and in US. And I want to add Japan to the list due to its interesting approach. To start with Japan, at the beginning of the spectrum, the BOJ has in place a yield control policy. This policy diverges from the other major central banks which are in the hiking cycle. A direct consequence, the yen lost value against all the other currencies, even against the euro. The objective of this webinar is to focus our attentions on sovereign and corporate bonds, but we cannot ignore the trajectory of the currency. Regarding foreign exchange here in the south of Europe, the tourism industry had a nice recovery this summer, thanks to the Nordic tourists, but not only. The American also came with a high purchasing power. Now let's have a look on the next slide, which is the central bank policy rate. And what we can see here, we had in, by the way, Japan. We want to add now Brazil. To put all these figures in perspective, if you start with the last column, which is the change in percentage, we can see that the Central Bank of Brazil and the Fed had an aggressive hiking approach this year compared to the other countries which are present in this table. 4.5 for Brazil, 3% for US. Now, back to the current rate, policy rate, I mean, if you make the abstraction of Brazil at 13.75, the US is in first place at 3.25, followed by UK at 2.25. Same for the Nordic banks. We should ask yourself why the ranking is so different compared to the 10 years yield that we saw previously. It's due to the term structure. We'll come back to it when we will discuss the Federal Reserve. In conclusion here, all the major central banks are now in a positive territory, ranging from 0.5% for Switzerland to 3.25% for US. And the exceptions remains Japan at negative 0.1. Let's go now on the next slide, and what we can see on this slide, it's to show the pattern of the past years and the frequency, and we can notice that 2022 so far was a busy year in terms of hiking. Now we spoke about the developed market. Let's have a look of the emerging market. As we discussed in our previous webinar, this chart provides you a clear idea that the emerging market were preventive compared to the advanced economy. As you can see here in the light color emerging and in dark color developing market. So this chart concludes the first part of the presentation. In this second part, let's explore the Federal Reserve, the ECB, which are two major central banks. Here on the next slide, US, and here with US. Let's start with the most popular central bank, the Federal Reserve. I want to remind you the definition of the Federal Act of the Fed: maximum unemployment, stable price, and moderate long-term interest rate. It's commonly known as the dual mandate. So let's speak about the hike. The first hike took place in March with 25 basis points. The second took place in May with 50 basis points, and the third one in June with 75 basis points. We see here there is quite an acceleration. In July, the hike was 75 basis points, and finally, in September, it was the 75 basis point. We spoke on these things. We spoke about the term structure, and as we can see, if you compare the spread of the 10 years versus the 2 years, this is the most inverted for the past 20 years, since April 2000. Historically, since 1976, yield inversions tend to lead upcoming recessions by around 60 months. Doesn't seem like a good sign going forward. If you remember, we spoke about the Taylor rules. A quick definition to remind you of the Taylor rules. It's an econometric model that describes the relationship between Federal Reserve operating target and the rate of inflation and gross domestic product. Based on this model, we should be at 9.25 in US. We are currently at 3.25. So the differential, as you can see, it's 5.89. As you remember, we start our journey at 0.25. Now, to speak about the central bank, we need also to discuss about the labor market. On that side, as you can see, participation rate in US. It's a very important thing, because why it's so important, participation rate? Because it's measure the number of people on the working age population in the economy who are participate to the activity. This is an important metric when the economy is not growing or in phase of recession. And as you can see in this chart, the pandemic had an impact. The participant rate is not back to pre-pandemic level. We are still below pre-pandemic level. US workers are still looking for a better job, maybe, better salary, or rich enough to live without a job. It was not a small phenomenon. It's still a massive one. The question is, this trend will reverse soon. In these next two slides, we will use two indicators, job opening and initial jobs claim, to try to provide you with an answer to these questions. These two indicators are different. Why? Because the initial jobless claim is a leading indicator when the job opening is a lagging indicator. It's an important debate to point here and take a moment to discuss it. Why? Some economists say that the Fed is too focused on lagging indicators when it should be focused on leading indicators. This argument is a misinterpretation of the Fed to fight inflation, and the consequence is a potential policy mistake that could bring us to a deeper recession. Let's see these other indicators. Here, in this case, is the job opening versus the number of employed people. The conditions are still tight with 9.8 job opening for every unemployed person. Going forward, we expect the amount of job opening to get closer that of the unemployment people, driven by both increasing unemployment and declining job, as Europe corporations grow more cautiously about the new hires. But the conclusion of this slide is to showing you that it's seriously a lagging indicators. Now, let's go to the next one, which is this one, is a leading indicator. It's initial jobs claim and average weekly hours. Let's start with average weekly hours, who has been falling since the beginning of the year. This indicator normally precedes change in employment rate. Initial jobless claim also is ticking up, an early sign of a labor market conditions deteriorating. So, as you can see, we are still tight from a job opening, but initial jobless claim less preserved that something is going on and not in the right directions. Now, let's go to the next slide and we will speak about Europe. As you remember, the mandate of the European Central Bank is to maintain price stability, and it shouldn't go beyond this point. It doesn't have the dual mandate. I have a different perception. I think they bought instability for years. As a portfolio manager, it was a difficult task to extract value from European bonds. Why? Because we have been forced in the previous years to extend our durations to escape negative rate. Today, we are paying the consequence of this negative rate. Like I say, in conclusions, Europe, it's familiar due to our location, familiar place, but ECB provides us with serious headache in terms of credibility compared to the other banks. Now, on the hiking side, 2 hikes so far, July with 50 basis points and September with 75 basis points. Now, as we did the same comparison in US versus the 10 years versus the 2 years, here, for the moment, we are close to reverse, but not yet. I will go to the next slide now. And to come back to the EU Taylor rules, as we can see, we should estimate 9.6, but the current ECB rate is at 1.25. So the spread is more than 8%. If you remember here, in US, it was around 5. So clearly, the ECB is much more behind the curve compared to the Federal Reserve. Now, let's go and discuss again the labor market, Europe versus US. And as we can see here, definitely Europe is at a full employment and everyone is back to work. So, as you can see, different situation in Europe versus US, sorry. Now, you should ask yourself what's the market expectations and the policy rate. As you can see, we expect 5 more hikes in US and we could reach 4.4. When in Europe, market expectations expect more than 8 hikes and we could reach 3%. Again, ECB is still behind the curve compared to the Fed. I will now discuss inflation figure. The most common inflation figures is CPI. Why CPI offer you a nice indications that now at the moment EU is at 9.1 and US 8.3. But as we discussed before, for the labor market, it's also a lagging indicator. We try to find answer, is it a peak or not? So to answer these questions, let's go to discuss input price. It seems like it was peaking for manufacturing goods, but also service. So these are leading indicators. Now, another leading indicator is the freight trade route from Shanghai to Rotterdam, to Los Angeles, to Geneva, and to New York. As we can see, it's going down. Is it a good sign? It seems like we have peaked also on that side, on that perspective. Also, something interesting that we discussed on our previous webinars is the supply chain pressure, which seems to go now okay. So is it a sign that we are going into a normalization or we are going into a recession? I mean, we should monitor closely this indicator. I would like to thank you for your attention, and I hope to see you soon in our next webinar. Thank you very much, and I wish you a lovely day.